It's a choice about how we govern, and so the process of, we've done stories about, I guess the sort of most direct analog would be something the design of ballots. So, ballots are the way they are because people chose them to be that way. And one of the things about our system is that we have a very Republican system where like every different municipality runs its own elections. I mean, this system was built that way because the people who are our founders of our democracy felt that concentrated power was really dangerous because they were afraid of a king. And so they made a system that was, extremely dispersed. The problem with that is if everyone runs their own elections, there's no standard, idea of what a ballot looks like. There's no standard idea of how you run an election. Everyone decides for themselves. And this is, really apparent, back in 2000 when George W. Bush was running against Al Gore. There was this butterfly ballot that was in Broward County. And the butterfly ballot's a very strange design. It has like the selections in the center, like little holes that you poke, and then the names on each side. They kind of go back and forth. And the first line said George W. Bush. The next line down was on the opposite page and it said Pat Buchanan. And the next line down from that said Al Gore. And so if you read it and you were thinking about as one page versus 2 pages, and you hit the second hole down thinking you were voting for Al Gore, you were actually voting for Pat Buchanan. And this was just a poorly designed ballot that made people think they were voting for one candidate and actually supposed to vote for another. So like all of design is about trying to gently coerce people into how to use it and convey information. And if you do it wrong, you can really mess things up. And that's why design is really important for all this stuff.
You touched on it a little just now, but what is design to you and how has getting interested in it affected how you look at things in your day-to-day life?
I mean, design is anything that a human makes a decision about, And so, the reason why I wanted to do a show about design was because I was a longtime radio reporter. And when I was creating my own show, what you want to do is you want to create a lens that focuses your attention enough that people who tune in or download know kind of what they're getting. It's a show about something. But like as a creator, you want it broad enough so that you can do a story about whatever the hell you want. And so you do a story, make a show about design, And so to me, it was like a way that I could do what I just wanted to make sure I loved my job for the next, 10, 20 years. And so I made a show for me, for that reason. And then what I like is we tell stories about humans and our values. That's what 99% Invisible is about. But we use design as a lens, as a way to focus that energy. Because there's so many ways to tell stories about things. And I just like design as that angle. Like it's fun for me. And I just like looking around the world, and I like to rather than just accept the way things are, really question the way things are and recognize that every little bit of what you touch and interact with was a decision made by a person. And for the most part, that person had really good intentions. And it's nice to be in the warm embrace of people's good intentions. And I find that endlessly fascinating.
Thank you for touching on your show a little bit. So kind of on that note, could you tell us a little bit more about the genesis of 99% Invisible? And specifically if there's kind of a moment, a person, or a story behind its origin and evolution, and then additionally, in what ways you've seen it grow over time and kind of what factors have contributed to its growth?
Yeah, so I worked in public radio for a long time. I just kind of loved public radio. I liked the way people talked and I wanted to be in on it. And so I volunteered at a radio station for years and I did different jobs. And there was a certain point where I was helping develop the news department at KALW in San Francisco. And the local chapter of the American Institute of Architects had gotten in touch. And they had this idea of funding a little 2-minute story about a local building that could be dropped into Morning Edition, which is like the standard NPR show. And Morning Edition has a clock, which has all these stories divided into, and as a local like broadcaster of Morning Edition, you have the right to take out a story and add your own local story, and you can like adjust it to make it fit. And the idea was to tell this little 2-minute story about some piece of local architecture or something like that. And general manager named Matt Martin, he called me in and just said, "What do you think? What can we do here?" And I was like, "Well, I love this idea because I love architecture, but I think I would broaden it to design in general. Like I had this idea that there was a person or there was a regulation for how steep a curb cut ramp was on a sidewalk, like those little ramps to make it so that wheels can go over it, whether it's a stroller or a wheelchair. And I was really interested in finding out like who decided that. How acute was that angle? I get really interested in really boring things. You're gonna learn that about me. But like I was just like, somebody decided that, and I wanted to tell a tiny story that made you think about the world more deeply. And that was kind of the idea of it. And I gathered all these different designers together, like a landscape designer, a product designer, different architects, structural engineers. And I was trying to come up with a name for the show. And I was like, I want to name it something, but I don't want to use the word design. I don't know why, I just didn't want it. And I was trying to, like, what is the thing that you all do that is shared? And one of them had this book called Massive Change by Bruce Mao. And there's a quote in it that says, the 99% invisible activity that shapes our world. And it was like, and the consensus was from these designers, it's like, if we do our jobs right, it's mostly invisible. And I was like, 99% invisible. It's like, I could do that. I could do that show forever if it was called 99% invisible. So that's how that show started. And so it was this little 4-minute thing. It was supposed to be 2 minutes. I was like, I need people to fall in love with these tiny little details. And so I cannot make people fall in love with a story in 2 minutes, but I could make people fall in love with a story in 4 minutes. And so it's 4 minutes. And then I released it as a podcast, and then eventually like people found it, and nobody cared that it fit into the C block of Morning Edition. And then the stories got longer and longer and longer. And then it wasn't a radio show anymore, it was a podcast. It was clearly, I was making it first for the podcast audience instead of the radio audience. And that's really how it all began. Yeah.
And since then, of course, your show has found massive success and has carried over for over a decade. In that time, do you have any episodes of yours or specific moments that are favorites of yours or really surprising to you?
Well, I don't know. I always say that my least favorite story is the story we just finished because I'm sick of it. And then my favorite one is the idea we had before we started, because everything in between, when I say yes to a thing, I love the thing the most, and then I hate every moment of it until it comes out. And then I go back and listen to it and I go, oh, we did okay there, So I think one of the things that was surprising is I was asked to speak at the TED conference, and I did this TED talk about flags. And at the time I thought, oh, this is the stupidest TED talk that's ever existed. Like I just was like, I went to the first day, and like the Prime Minister of Australia presented, and he normalized trade relationships with China. And I was like, I'd have to give my stupid flag talk in 2 days. I'm such a moron, And then we did it, and it was. I tease them to this day that it's the most successful TED talk of all time because it's affected the most change. Like there's been 3, so it's about how flags are poorly designed. We might talk about it a little bit more later, but flags are pretty poorly designed around the world, but it's changed like 300 flags. Like since the TED talk, like 300 municipal flags have been changed. I don't think there's any sort of efficacy that's greater measure than that in terms of a TED Talk. As silly as it was kind of a highlight. And then, just like going independent and, raising money and figuring out a way for in Radiotopia, all those things were real good highlights. The stories are just like, the stories I love. I love talking to people. My favorite part of the job is interviewing people. So, a really good moment with just a human in a conversation is probably my favorite moment, whether it creates a piece of content or not.
There's one question that everyone is asking right now. I'm going to ask it again. What are your thoughts on the proliferation of artificial intelligence?
Okay. Here's the thing about me. You'll know exactly what I think about everything in terms of like I've only thought deeply about a subject if you've heard a story about that subject. But I'll tell you this. We have talked about algorithms before. AI is sort of a fancy algorithm, essentially. The problem with algorithms and the problem with any type of machine learning is what it does is it hoovers up all the thoughts that we've had before and then presents them to you. And so all the biases and all the problems and all the racism and all the colonialism that has existed in our history is like sucked up into that algorithm and it spits out more of the same. So you have to be extremely careful about how you just select your data set for what creates your AI. And if you're not, then you'll repeat the same mistakes and no original and new thought will ever be created. And so that's what I think about AI. I think it needs to be just tended to and recognize how you're building a thing and what biases are put inside of it. They can be super good and super powerful, and there's all kinds of great things that can be created. But when it comes to most machine learning, it's all the thoughts have already been had, and I'm a big fan of new thoughts.
So this is kind of going back to what you were discussing earlier, but your TED Talk on civic flags that we've mentioned, in which you shared the 5 principles of civic design of city flags, was very compelling and entertaining, I think in all of our opinions. And in it, you kind of extol the flag of Chicago and at the same time lament the flag of San Francisco on the screen. So could you share us a little bit more about why, and if you could redesign your own flag for San Francisco, what would that entail to appropriately represent the city?
Okay, so this beauty over here, this is the city of Chicago flag. I lived in Chicago for a long time. So the whole genesis of this story was, I did not know cities had their own flags. Like, I seriously had never seen one before. I moved to Chicago, and this flag is everywhere in Chicago. It is on municipal buildings. It is a patch on, police officers' uniform. It is tattoos on bike messengers. Everybody loves the flag. It doesn't matter what part of, what part of society you were in. If you're in Chicago, you use the flag. And it has all these great little design elements like the 6-pointed star that are used, and you put them on a coffee cup, and then you have your Chicago pride when you drink your coffee. And so I lived in San Francisco for like 8 years. I moved to Chicago. I lived there for a while, and I moved back to the Bay Area. And I was like, so what's this? What's the San Francisco flag then? And I looked this thing up, this ugly thing. And I was wondering, is there a design reason why I see the Chicago flag everywhere and I never see the San Francisco flag? And I began researching flags and flag design, and I found this organization called the North American Vexillological Association. And there's this guy there named Ted Kaye. And he kind of was he put together a little pamphlet called Good Flag, Bad Flag. He had kind of taken he was not a designer, he was a sort of numbers guy. He's just a flag enthusiast, a very, very sweet man who I've become friends with. And he kind of took all that he saw about flags that were successful and used and flown a lot, like the City of Chicago flag, and distilled them into these principles of what made a good flag. And his assertion is, and my assertion is the same, is that if you design a good flag, it is used. And if you don't design a good flag, it is never flown, okay? So the reason why, it's not that people in San Francisco aren't full of San Francisco pride. They totally are. They can be super annoying about it, okay? So that's not the problem. The problem is the flag's ugly, okay? So the way you'd fix it, okay, there's a few principles, and if I can remember them, it's like, so use a few colors, make it simple enough that a child could draw it from memory, never use words on your flag, ding, ding. There's two more. I can't, anyway, I recorded that 8 years ago. So the way you make this, the reason why you don't have words on a flag is why? Because the flag is flown in the air. So you see it from the back half the time. So you don't put words on a flag. If you put words on it, if you have symbolism and you have to write the name on it, then your symbolism has failed. So to make this thing better is you take the word San Francisco off of it. I mean, that's the first thing. I think I don't know, that phoenix. Okay, this is the phoenix symbolizing the city rising from the ashes after the devastating fires after the 1906 earthquake. Here's the problem with the phoenix. That meant a lot at the time. There's other flags with the phoenix on it. There's Atlanta, who was also burned to the ground and rebuilt, and it has a phoenix on its flag. And most notably, since 1906, there's been another place with a prominent phoenix on its flag, and it's the city of Phoenix, okay? And I think that they claim right to it, as far as I'm concerned. And so I don't know, I would drop the whole Phoenix thing. But if I were to make this one better, I'd take San Francisco off. I'd stylize the Phoenix a little bit more. It's both it looks like clip art. It's kind of crude and ugly. But I would most likely just say, get rid of the Phoenix altogether and start something new. But here's the thing. Since I put out that TED Talk and all these flag fights have happened and people argue about flags and they always try to rope me into it, I never get involved. My whole point was that I think flags are really cool. I think they're fun to look at, they're fun to think about, and they're fun to assess how they are a representation of your values. And I think a good way to make a good flag that people care about is to use good design principles for them. But what I really care about is that people put their values in their flag and then they fly it with pride. And that is their decision to make. It's their decision to assess what Utah means to them, and then make a flag that reflects that. And I don't want to get involved in that. I'm not from Utah, but I want them just to think about it. And if they love an ugly flag, if San Francisco just was full arm embrace of this flag and they flew it and they loved it, great. I will never complain about that. But if they say to me, why don't, but my assertion is they don't fly a flag because it's ugly. And you can make it better. So.
One of the things that I think is so amazing about your podcast is your ability to sort of notice so many things, whether the design aspects, architectural aspects, or social aspects of our world that just so often seem people pay no attention to. If you had any advice or a plea even of how do you wish people paid attention, and what do you think people should pay more attention to really generally about our society, democracy, even to bring it back into the theme of today, or design?
Well, I think one of the things about design is that you notice where it fails more than you notice where it succeeds. And so the key, have you ever walked up a set of stairs and they're kind of uniform as to what they are, but one of them is a little bit off, and then your toe kind of hits it every single time. Like that's a failure of design that you like. Your body intuitively knows a certain way to walk up the stairs, and then when they don't do that, or like you live in a house, you can live in a house for like 20 years, and then there's this bank of light switch, like 3 light switches, and you can never remember which switch goes to which light, or which knob on the gas stove goes. You have to look up at a little chart to know which knob goes to which burner. Like, that's a failure of design, and we run across it. And you should know as a human, you're not dumb. That is not your fault. That is a designer's fault, that you are confused all the time when it comes to these things. And they could be made better. But the inverse of that is when you operate in life and it is pretty frictionless a lot of the time. That also was a design decision. And it's because we are surrounded by experts who know how to do things, who are taking care of you. Like their job is to anticipate your problems before you even know you have problems. And it really doing this show has made me appreciate the world and the care that goes into it so much, because I have met people who have thought very, very deeply about how tall that step is, that I do not think about at all. I have the luxury to never think about it. And so I think that's the first thing when it comes to like appreciating design, is it allows you to like appreciate the world better. And if you're in that mindset, then the world is full of care. And a place that's full of care is a place that you take care of. And you recognize that we're all in this together. And that's a cornerstone to a good democracy, as far as I'm concerned, is appreciating the world in that way. And so, like, I drove here from Berkeley today, and Marin Avenue was blocked because there was some kind of traffic. And I was super annoyed. But I do a show, I talk about infrastructure, I talk about all the great things we build all the time. And I just like to stop myself and recognize that if I like bridges and cool things that we build, and I really love that we collectively do these things that are amazing, that at some point someone has to build them and has to inconvenience me slightly during that process. And I should chill the hell out. And I think all of those things are about, when it comes to democracy, the cornerstone of democracy is kind of care. And it's also the power of what these choices are made for us, and to recognize them and to go like, okay, I'm being coerced into this action. I want to make sure I'm happy with that coercion, or I resist that coercion. And I think that nascent awareness of the world is the basis of an informed society, which makes for a functional democracy. I think that answers your question. Okay.
What pathways are available for people in the audience who are maybe interested in design in a broad sense, like you cover on the show, but aren't sure what niche they want to specialize in?
For design, I don't really know. I'm not really a designer. I'm really just an appreciator of what the folks do. So what I'd recommend is the best designers I know are really like liberal arts, liberal-minded thinkers. And so they really just like, the key to a good design is to take as much input from as many sources as possible. You interview, you pay attention, you make sure that you're not designing things just for you. Like, the problem with the Silicon Valley mindset is if the people solving the problems are 25-year-olds who wear hoodies, then they will only solve the problems of 25-year-olds in hoodies. They don't solve the problems of everybody else. And so what they do is it's like you notice that like there was a range of things that were like there were great things that I kind of loved that were all things that their mom did for them. Like bring me food, take me to my game. You know, like it was all stuff that like people who didn't know how to take care of themselves, their mom used to do for them. They turned that into apps and they turned it into billions of dollars. That's fine. I like those things too. They don't really solve the problems of everybody. They solve the problems of 25-year-olds who want their moms to do stuff for them. So the key to being a good designer is helping the world. Is to expand your scope about what kind of problems need to be solved. Yeah, that's it.
So you mentioned kind of the cornerstones of a democratic society. So kind of furthering that question, when you think about the intersection between design and civics or democratic ideals, what comes to mind for you?
Could you say that one more time?
Yes, sorry, I talked kind of fast. When you think about the intersection between design and civics or democratic ideals, what comes to mind for you? And is there a particular story or episode from your podcast, 99% Invisible, that you feel kind of captures this intersection?
Well, what I love about using design as a lens to think about, just like our civic engagement, is that it really is at every level. It's the design of the ballot. It's the design of our democracy as a whole. It's the design of bridges and big municipal projects, and it's also like the of tiny things like curb cuts and stuff. What I think about when I think about this book that I wrote with my colleague Kurt Kolstad is called The 99% Invisible City, and the assertion of that book through lots of different stories is that the city is a reflection of our collective values, and some of that is top-down design. That's somebody who planned and thought of the city and wanted to be a certain way, and we interact with that. And some of that is bottom-up design of like how people interact and change the city to suit their needs, and then together that is what makes up a city. And it's always this push and pull between like top-down design and bottom-up intervention, which makes what we live in today. And it's like, and the main thing that I think it's when design should reflect our values, and when they don't, you should change the design of things. So like if there was one thing about COVID which was a benefit, there was this moment when the pandemic happened where these plexiglass screens went up in front of people's, in front of the cash register, little wayfinding things on the floor started popping up where it's like, you stand here, this is 6 feet away from here. People weren't driving as much and they needed outdoor space to to eat in cafes, and so they took over parking spaces and began to say oh, we need spaces to congregate, but we want to be outside. There was this massive rethink of the city and wayfinding and how to operate in the world. And those moments are really important intellectually for us to sort of give deep thought into why things are the way they are. There's a solipsism in just the basic human psyche, which is like, the way I grew up is the way things ought to be. Or when I found what cities are, or what a road is supposed to be like, when I encountered that as a sentient human, that is the way things are, and you have to convince me that they shouldn't be that way. Now, we grew up in this period of time where roads were meant for cars. For millennia, roads were not just meant for cars. They were meant for walking, they were meant for horses, they were meant for vendors to sit on. At a certain point, we just yielded that space to cars. We made that decision because we valued what cars gave us, and cars give us all kinds of great things, and I have no great objection to cars, although I wish there were less of them. But one of the things about the COVID pandemic was we said, you know what, this space that we yielded to cars, I think it's a little more important for us to have a place to sit instead. And it made us reassess this space that we had just given away. And that reassessment should happen all the time. It shouldn't just happen because of a pandemic. Because it reflected an acuteness of our values at that moment, that we needed a thing so desperate that we would, just take up a parking space for it. But we should always think about those things. And that civic discourse through design is like, I love that stuff so much. I mean, I've devoted my life to thinking about that stuff. And I think that's a really cool way to assess the world, is to assess the built world and our choices as a reflection of our values. And when they don't match our values, then change them. And they give us a target for changing something. And when we're trying to make the world a better place, we can latch on to little things that we can change. I mean, maybe we can't change our sense of, or how many cars are being sold, or the oil prices or whatever, but maybe we can make sure that this cafe has seating out there, and that just takes a little bit of power away from the car. And then the other cafe does, and the other cafe does. Or or you change the flag, and all of a sudden there's a sense of pride about a city that's different than what it was before. And all of a sudden you pay more attention to who's on city council. I think that it's a way into solving small problems when civics as a whole can be daunting.
Wow, thank you so much for that answer. You've become, over the years, you are a pioneer of podcasting as a medium, a medium that has exploded over the past 2 decades, or decade really. How do you see podcasting developing in the future, and what do you think the future of broadcasting more generally is?
Oh man, these are hard. You're good at this. So podcasting was different. So I came up in radio, and one of the things about radio is it is a stream that goes out over the air that's localized to where it's transmitted. So the medium, the way that a story is told is really matters of how it's presented. Okay, so on a radio, you join a radio signal in process. You're not there from the beginning necessarily. So notice when you listen to the radio, they constantly reintroduce the guest, or they do a thing. No one listens to radio in this room. There was a thing called radio. Okay, and you just you come on in the middle of the song. You don't necessarily hear the beginning of the song. So you change, the storytelling style changed. Now, the thing that podcasting changed for me personally was that people are selecting you. They're listening from the beginning, so you can tell deeper stories. They have greater trust in you to tell some story about. I'm going to talk about manhole covers for 40 minutes, and I'm going to trust that you care. Okay, you have to constantly grab people when it's on a stream in the radio to convince them why this is interesting. But you kind of already have them in your pocket when you have a podcast. So you can specialize, and you can talk to them directly, and you can talk to them more intimately. And that's why I mic myself like this in my podcast, because I'm trying to be the inside of their head voice. I'm trying to be a person convincing them that something is important that is sitting next to them. And you don't get to do that because broadcasting is broadcasting. It's I'm trying to convince as many people about an idea. And so that's how that changed. That's what it meant to me. As an art form, it changed the way I told stories, because I could tell specific stories, intimate stories, and stories about boring things, and people came along with me for the ride. What the future, and it also facilitated a connection with an audience that was direct, which is what those Kickstarters and things are all about. It's like before, for me to be heard on the radio, I had to convince a program director at a radio station to play the show that went out to people, and now I don't do that at all. And no one tells me what I can and can't do. Okay. The audience tells me what I can and can't do. The evolution from here is almost not for me to say. The reason is I am old. And my job as a mentor to people that I work with and the people I give jobs to who are younger and smarter and better at this than me is my job is to train them to ask the questions that I can't even think to ask. And my hope is, even if I told you what I thought podcasting should be or this medium should be, that you wouldn't listen to it because they should decide it. And I should step out of the way. And so I don't really know. What I fell in love with was intimate storytelling about things that made me appreciate the world differently. I hope that's a thread to the future of things. I don't know if it will be. It probably will be because stories are stories and stuff like that. But I hope to be surprised by things. That's what I want the most. I want for you guys to decide what the future of podcasting is, and not me. So I don't know.
Your show, 99% Invisible, has grown hugely in popularity since it began. What's been the process of scaling it up? And how has your role in the show changed? And what's next for you and your ecosystem of podcasts?
I started the show, it was just me. I did it in my bedroom at night. It was recorded kind of like quiet and low because my kids were sleeping in the next room. It's sort of one of the reasons why the tone of the show is the way it is. To scale it, I got some money and then I hired people and then they began working on it too. And I began to let people do parts of it and let go of doing everything, which can be hard for people who create things. Just you'll encounter this some point in your life where you're going to have to hand over part of your job and what you do to somebody else, and it's going to be very painful. I'm very good at it now. I used to really hate it, and now there are 13 people work on the show. I used to just be me. And the reason why the shows are now 30, 40 minutes long and they have 5 or 6 interviews in them instead of one, and they're smarter and better and cooler in every way is because I do not do them by myself. After this, I'm going to run home. I'm going to be in an edit for a piece, it's the first time I'm hearing any part of the piece. I was a little bit in its conception, but I didn't work on it. And this brilliant guy named Chris Berube will write a thing. He's interviewed a bunch of people. He'll put it together in some form so I could check it out. And I just get to sit there like the king, and they just bring me things that are brilliant. It's awesome. And I don't do it myself anymore. I can't do it myself anymore. It wouldn't be good if I did it myself anymore. And the transition of that was really, really important and good. And it made the show better and made it last longer. I never could have done it on my own for that long. And the future of it is I hope that we get more, as we add more people, the show is really, I'm really primary because I'm the host and I'm there. But the show is this collective enterprise. And so it changes. Every time there's a new person involved, it changes a lot. People bring different parts to it. And when you're a good leader, you allow it to change based on what people bring to it and not try to my job is I hold the wheel lightly into what direction we go to, but for the most part, you kind of let it follow what it's supposed to follow. And so hopefully I'll just let it follow where it's supposed to follow in the future. I don't know. We did a book because you do 13 years of a show and it's it's like if you go like, oh, I remember that thing about flags. What was that episode called? We called it Vexillionaire. You'll never find that episode. Like it's embedded in this linear format of listening to an audience. So if you want to learn one thing and you have to listen to 20 minutes of me talking, that's not a very efficient way. So like I wanted to write a book because all of a sudden like you could lay it all out and you could find it and it made sense. I'm a big believer in like everything needs a purpose. It shouldn't just exist because I can sell a book doesn't mean I should make a book. It should exist because it serves the information better. So my goal for the future is that whatever we do, it's for a purpose, you know, and mostly it's the purpose of serving the staff who works with me and the stories they want to tell. That's my job now, is to facilitate their greatness. Yeah. So.
Thank you for that response. I think we have time for just one more question before opening it up to the audience. So we've discussed the importance of social infrastructure in our TLP Future Cities course, which is something you dove into in your podcast episode, Palaces for the People, which we listened to in class. And this is a quote from when you interviewed sociologist and author Eric Kleinberg, kind of remarking about public ownership and the importance of public spaces in our daily lives. So could you talk a little bit more about the importance of public spaces and people's sense of public ownership and the way this manifests into our daily lives and democratic ideals?
Yeah, well, this kind of nails it. The problem with I'm a capitalist, and capitalism is fine. There's some things that a lot of work needs to be done, but what I hate is the commodification of all spaces, that everything is owned by someone at all times, but there is a tradition, and it's a novel thing that we invented as Americans. We invented the concept of wilderness. Like in 1964, the Wilderness Act was the first time that a country said, I'm going to take this piece of land and you can't touch it. It's part of our values for you to not touch it. And we will collectively own it. You can't put machines on it. You can walk through it. You can't drive a car on it. That is a thing that, as much as people talk about the American dream being like make as much money as you can and commodifying every space of it, we also invented that. And the idea that we could collectively care and own for an idea more than a thing that we're buying and selling each other is something that I just think is precious. And the idea that there are public spaces that you do not have to ask permission to trammel on is really, really a lovely thing. And if we do not occupy and use public spaces, they will be colonized by people trying to commodify those spaces. Rights unused are rights lost. And so if there's a public staircase, walk on it. If there's a public park, sit in it. I don't want every interaction in public to be reduced like you have to buy a cup of coffee to exist in a space. You should not have to buy anything to live. And I think that collective ownership and that idea of a commons is so much the cornerstone of what we are as people. And we talk about the commodification part in our enterprising. And I'm an entrepreneur. I totally love enterprise. I love that people make something out of things. I love people hustling and whatever. But it is so much also a part of our character to preserve and to not exploit. I mean, there were exploited parts of preserving, trust me, but it's a long story. But the point is that public spaces are dear to us, and you should use them. Like as, young people, lay down in a park. Seriously, don't buy a thing to exist in a space. Learn to use spaces that are afforded to you, and just living life. It means that when somebody comes in and goes like, we don't need this park, we don't need this library, you have Amazon, we don't need this whatever. Use those spaces, because if you don't, they'll be lost. and then everything is mediated through an app, and everything is mediated through buying something. And that's a sucky world, I think.
Thank you so much. We want to take this time to open it up to audience questions. So if anyone